My father publicly mocked my life choices at a lavish dinner, calling me a failure because I wasn't married. He didn't realize I was the only reason he wasn't sleeping on the street. So, I smiled, cut off his funding, and watched his world crumble instantly. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The migraine had been building since 3 o'clock that afternoon, a sharp, rhythmic thumping behind my left eye that synchronized perfectly with the click-clack of my heels on the marble floor of the restaurant. I shouldn't have come. My body was screaming at me to go home, to crawl into bed with the blackout curtains drawn and a cold compress on my forehead. I had been working 70-hour weeks for the last 3 months, closing out the fiscal year for my firm, and I was physically depleted. My skin felt tight and sensitive, my eyes were dry, and I had a low-grade fever that made the ambient noise of the high-end Italian bistro sound like a roaring jet engine. But I was here. I was here because it was Christopher's 65th birthday, and in my family, or rather, the family I paid to maintain, appearances were the only currency that mattered. "Evelyn, darling, you look tired," Linda said as I slid into the booth. She didn't mean it kindly. Linda, my stepmother of 20 years, had a way of weaponizing concern. She was wearing a new dress, I noticed. Silk, emerald green, likely designer. It draped over her shoulder in a way that screamed money, my money. "It's been a long quarter, Linda," I said, my voice sounding thinner than I would have liked. I reached for the water glass, my hand trembling slightly from a mixture of caffeine and exhaustion. Merging 2 portfolios isn't exactly a walk in the park. "Well, you know what they say," Christopher boomed from the head of the table. He looked healthy, flushed with wine and the glow of self-importance. He raised his glass of Barolo, a bottle that I knew cost $300 because I had checked the menu prices online before arriving to budget for the bill. "All work and no play makes Evelyn a dull girl." Timothy, my 24-year-old half-brother, snorted into his calamari. He was dressed in a suit that fit him poorly, not because it was cheap, but because he refused to have it tailored, preferring the slouchy look he insisted was fashionable. He was currently between opportunities, a state of being that had lasted since his college graduation 2 years ago. "I'm just working hard, Dad," I murmured, trying to focus on the menu. The letters were swimming. "Someone has to." I meant it as a throwaway comment, a defense mechanism, but the table went quiet. Christopher's smile tightened just a fraction. He hated any reminder of reality. "We all work hard in our own ways, Evelyn," Christopher said, his voice dropping to that patronizing baritone he used when he wanted to assert dominance. "Just because you sit in an office crunching numbers doesn't mean you understand the complexities of networking, of building a legacy." I bit my tongue. I bit it so hard I tasted copper. Legacy. The only legacy Christopher had built in the last decade was a mountain of debt and a reputation for bouncing checks. The waiter arrived, breaking the tension, and Christopher ordered for the table without asking me. More wine, the seafood tower, the truffled risotto. He was spending like a king. I sat there, calculating the total in my head, feeling the familiar dread of the notification that would soon pop up on my phone, transaction approved. But the blow came later. It came after the tiramisu, when the restaurant was fullest, the noise level at its peak. Christopher tapped his spoon against his glass, signaling for attention. He loved an audience. "I just want to say," he began, standing up and gesturing grandly, "how proud I am of my family. Linda, my rock, and Timothy." He turned his beaming gaze to my brother. "Timothy, who has just informed me he has a promising lead on a startup venture. He's going to be the next tech mogul, I can feel it. A man with vision, a man who will carry on the family name." Timothy preened, looking smugly at me. "And Evelyn," Christopher said. He paused, the warmth left his eyes. "Evelyn, who is here?" A few people at nearby tables chuckled. "You know," he continued, loud enough for the tables adjacent to us to hear clearly, "I worry about you, Evelyn, truly. You're 38 years old. No husband, no children, no prospects. My stomach dropped. The migraine spiked, a blinding flash of pain. Dad, please. No, we have to be honest, he said, waving a hand dismissively. You've focused so much on this little career of yours, but what do you have to show for it? An empty apartment and a cat? You're a woman with no family of your own. Look at you, you're fading away. He leaned in, his face twisted into a mock-sympathetic sneer. Honestly, Evelyn, it's a failure. You are a failure as a woman, but don't worry, at least you have us to give your life some meaning. The table erupted in laughter. Linda giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. Timothy slapped the table, shaking his head. Roasted, he muttered. I looked around. Strangers were looking at me, some with pity, some with amusement. My father, the man whose rent I had paid 3 days ago, was standing there, basking in the glory of my humiliation. The betrayal was worse than the exhaustion. It was worse than the financial burden. It was a physical blow to the chest that stopped my heart cold. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I didn't throw my wine in his face, though every fiber of my being screamed for me to do exactly that. Instead, a strange, cold calm washed over me. It was as if the fever suddenly broke, replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like ice water in my veins. Excuse me, I said softly. I stood up. My legs felt steadier than they had all evening. Oh, don't run off and cry, Evelyn, Linda called out, her voice shrill and teasing. He's just giving you some tough love, you need to hear it. I'm just going to the restroom, I lied. I walked calmly through the restaurant, navigating the maze of tables until I reached the heavy oak door of the ladies' room. Once inside, I locked the door to the handicap stall and leaned back against it, closing my eyes. I breathed in, counting to 4. I breathed out, counting to 4. I pulled my phone out of my clutch. My thumb hovered over the banking app. Current balance, checking. I scrolled down to the transaction history. Outgoing transfer, $3,200, landlord Christopher rent. Outgoing transfer, $450, utility Christopher power. Outgoing transfer, $800, lease Christopher car. The list went on, a digital paper trail of my servitude. For years, I had convinced myself this was duty. That because my mother had died when I was young, I owed it to my father to keep him afloat. I had convinced myself that his failures were just bad luck, that he loved me but was just stressed. But the look in his eyes tonight, there was no love there, there wasn't even respect. There was only contempt. He despised me. He despised me because he needed me, and to a narcissist like Christopher, the person who feeds you is the person you hate the most because they are living proof of your own inadequacy. I washed my hands at the sink, staring at my reflection. He was right about one thing. I looked tired. I looked worn down, but he was wrong about the cause. I wasn't worn down by my empty life. I was worn down by carrying 3 adults on my back for 6 years. My phone buzzed. A text from Timothy. Dad says come back out. He wants to order the vintage port for a toast. Don't be a sourpuss. A sourpuss. I was paying for the dinner. I was paying for the suit he was wearing. I was paying for the data plan he used to send that text. I dried my hands with a paper towel, moving deliberately. I reapplied my lipstick, a shade of deep crimson that looked like war paint. They thought I was trapped. They thought I was the spinster daughter, desperate for their approval, willing to eat their scraps of affection just to feel included. They thought my silence was submission. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten that I was a senior financial analyst. My entire career was built on risk assessment, asset management, and, when necessary, liquidation. I knew how to cut losses. I knew how to close an account. And most importantly, they had forgotten that the lease to their luxury apartment wasn't in Christopher's name. It wasn't in Linda's. It was in mine. I stared at myself in the mirror one last time. The tired woman was gone. In her place was someone cold, calculating, and ready to execute the most aggressive divestment of her career. "Okay, Dad," I whispered to the empty bathroom. "Let's talk about failure." To understand why I stayed in that bathroom for another 10 minutes, formulating a plan rather than storming out immediately, you have to understand the history. You have to understand the magnitude of the lie Christopher had been living. 6 years ago, Christopher was a consultant. That was the vague term he used for himself. In reality, he was a middleman for import deals that rarely materialized. He had always been a man of big ideas and little execution, but he had charm. He had a smile that could disarm a firing squad. For years, he coasted on loans, second mortgages, and the dwindling inheritance my mother had left behind, money that was supposed to help me, but which he had drained before I turned 18. When the crash came, it was total. He lost the house, my childhood home, he lost the cars. He was facing bankruptcy and potential fraud charges for mismanaging investor funds. I was 32 then, just starting to make real money in finance. I had worked my way up from a junior analyst, pulling all-nighters, eating vending machine dinners, saving every penny I could. I had a nest egg. I was looking to buy my own condo. Then Christopher called me, weeping, not just crying, sobbing. He told me he was going to be on the street. He told me Linda would leave him. He told me he was an old man with nothing left. "Evelyn, you're the only one I have," he had choked out. "Family helps family. I just need a bridge, 6 months. Just 6 months to get this new venture off the ground, and I'll pay you back double. I swear it on your mother's grave." I believed him. God help me, I believed him. I used my savings to put a deposit on a nice 2-bedroom apartment for them. The landlord wouldn't take Christopher's credit score, so I signed the lease. I put the utilities in my name. I started paying the monthly rent, which was exorbitant because Christopher insisted he needed a good address to impress clients. 6 months turned into a year turned into 6. Every time I brought it up, Christopher would deflect. "The deal is closing next week, Evie, have some faith. You're so obsessed with money, it's unbecoming. I raised you. I put food on your table for 18 years and you're counting pennies now." So I stopped asking. I just paid. I paid because I was afraid of the guilt. I paid because I didn't want to see my father homeless. And who was this man I was saving? Christopher was a masterpiece of deception. He was 65 but looked 50, thanks to the Botox and dye jobs I inadvertently funded. He spent his days at a parking space, a high-end coffee shop, taking meetings. He wore Italian loafers and drove a leased BMW that he claimed was a company car provided by a partner. There was no partner, there was only me. He was a predator who fed on appearances. He would critique my clothes, telling me I looked frumpy while wearing a jacket I bought him. He would scoff at my Toyota Camry, asking why I didn't upgrade, ignoring the fact that I couldn't afford a new car because I was paying for his BMW. And then there was his alliance with Linda and Timothy. Linda, 10 years his junior, was a former receptionist who had convinced herself she was a socialite. She spent her days shopping for bargains that still cost hundreds of dollars and complaining about the cleaning service I paid for. She whispered poison in Christopher's ear, telling him I was controlling, that I used my money to manipulate them. Timothy was their project. They treated him like a prince in waiting. He had potential. He was artistic. He couldn't work a 9 to 5 because it would stifle his creativity. So he sat on the couch in the apartment I paid for, playing video games and smoking weed, waiting for the world to discover his genius. They were a triad of leeches, and I was the host. But tonight, the host was dying. Tonight, the host had decided that the parasite had to be removed, even if it meant ripping out a piece of herself in the process. I looked at my phone again. I opened my email and drafted a message to my lawyer, Sarah. Sarah had been telling me to do this for 3 years. She was going to be thrilled. Subject, eviction proceedings, immediate action required. I didn't hit send yet. I needed one more piece of ammunition. I needed them to confirm, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that there was no redemption possible. I unlocked the bathroom stall and walked back out into the dining room. As I approached the table, I saw them. They were laughing again. Christopher was pouring the expensive port. "She's probably in there crying about her cats," Timothy said, loud enough for me to hear as I approached. "Let her cry," Christopher said, taking a sip of the dark, rich wine. "She needs to toughen up. She needs to realize that without us, she's nobody." I stopped a few feet from the table. I didn't sit down. I stood behind my chair, my hands resting on the back of it, feeling the smooth wood under my fingertips. "Welcome back, Sleeping Beauty," Christopher said, not bothering to look up. "Sit down, I've ordered you a glass. Try to look like you're enjoying yourself. It's a celebration." "I heard what you said," I said. My voice was low, devoid of the tremor that had been there earlier. Christopher finally looked at me. His eyes were glassy. "What?" "I heard what you said while I was walking up. That without you, I'm nobody." Christopher rolled his eyes. "Oh, Evelyn, don't start a scene, it's a figure of speech. Sit down." "No," I said, "I don't think I will." I looked at Linda, then at Timothy, and finally locked eyes with my father. "You think I'm a failure, Dad?" I asked, a small, dangerous smile touching my lips. "You think I have nothing?" "I think you're lonely," Christopher said, his voice hardening. "I think you're bitter, and I think you should show a little more gratitude to the people who tolerate your moods." "Gratitude," I repeated. The word hung in the air. "Yes, gratitude." He gestured around the table. "We are your family. We are the only people who will ever truly accept you." The trap was set. He had walked right into it. He truly believed he held the power. He truly believed that his presence in my life was a gift I should pay for. "Okay," I said. "You're right, I haven't been grateful enough, but I'm going to fix that, tonight." I pulled out my chair, picked up my purse, and slung it over my shoulder. "Where are you going?" Linda snapped. "The bill hasn't come yet." "I know," I said, "and for the first time in 6 years, neither am I." I didn't look back. That is the most important part of walking away. You cannot look back, not even for a second, or the resolve begins to fracture. I could hear the hum of the restaurant continuing behind me, the clinking of silverware, the laughter of strangers, but the silence from my family's table was deafening. I walked straight to the maitre d' stand. The host, a young man named Stefano who knew me because I was the one who always made the reservations, looked up with a smile that faltered when he saw my face. "Ms. Bennett, is everything all right? The dessert course just went out." "Everything is fine, Stefano," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "I'm leaving early. My father, Mr. Bennett, will be taking care of the check tonight. He insisted on treating us for his birthday." Stefano hesitated. He knew the drill. I always paid. I slipped him a $20 bill from my purse, a tip for him personally, not for the house. "He's celebrating a big new venture," I lied smoothly. "He wants to show off a bit. Don't embarrass him by bringing the machine to me." "Of course, Ms. Bennett. Have a good night." I walked out into the cool night air. The migraine was still there, a dull throb, but the crushing weight on my chest had vanished. I raised my hand and hailed a cab instantly, sliding into the backseat of a yellow sedan that smelled faintly of pine air freshener and old leather. "Where to?" the driver asked. "Midtown," I said, "and take the long way, go through the park." I needed time. I needed the dark, winding roads of Central Park to process what I had just done. I pulled my phone out. It was already lighting up. "Missed call, Dad, 2 missed call. Linda text from Timothy. WTF are you doing? Dad is freaking out." I stared at the screen. For years, these notifications would have sent me into a panic. I would have called back immediately, apologizing, offering to transfer money, desperate to smooth things over. But tonight, staring at the glowing names, I felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. I swiped down and put the phone on Do Not Disturb. Then, I opened my banking app again. It was time to go to work. The ride to my apartment took 40 minutes. In that time, I didn't cry. I didn't mourn the relationship. Instead, I conducted a forensic audit of my life. I sat in the dark backseat, the city lights streaking across my face, and I systematically dismantled the financial infrastructure that supported Christopher, Linda, and Timothy. First, the credit cards. I had given Christopher an emergency card linked to my primary account 4 years ago. He had sworn it was only for medical emergencies or car repairs. I clicked on the card details. Status, active. I hit lock card. Status, locked. I did the same for the supplementary card I had given Linda for groceries. Status, locked. Next, the utilities. The electric bill, the cable, the high-speed internet that Timothy used for his gaming, they were all in my name, auto-drafted from my account. I couldn't shut them off tonight. Utility companies were closed, but I could cancel the autopay. I logged into the provider portal and removed my checking account information. Let them get the paper bill. Let them see the red letters when the next cycle hit. When I finally got to my apartment, a modest one-bedroom walk-up that cost half of what I paid for their luxury condo, I didn't go to sleep. I made a pot of strong black coffee and sat at my dining table, opening my laptop. I needed to understand the full scope of the hemorrhage. I had been avoiding this for years, terrified of the total. I opened a new spreadsheet. I began to pull the data. Rent, car lease, insurance, allowances, loans that were never repaid, the credit card statements I had blindly paid without reviewing. I went back 6 years. It took me 3 hours. By the time I was done, my coffee was cold and the sun was threatening to rise over the skyline. I stared at the number in the bottom right cell, the sum total of my love. $482,000. Nearly $500,000. I could have bought a house, I could have started my own firm, I could have traveled the world. Instead, I had hasd insults. I had bought the privilege of being called a failure by a man wearing a watch I paid for. The anger finally came then. It wasn't a hot, fiery rage. It was cold, it was absolute. I opened my email and composed a message to Sarah, my attorney, and one of the few friends I had kept outside of work. Subject, immediate lease termination, the Bennett residence. Sarah, I need you to draft a notice to vacate. The lease is in my name, they are occupants at will. I want them out. What is the fastest legal timeline? Also, I need to know my liability if I surrender the car lease early. Call me as soon as you get this. I hit send, then I closed the laptop. The first phase was done. I had cut the supply lines. Now, I just had to wait for them to realize they were under siege. My phone started ringing at 7:00 a.m. They had waited until they thought I was awake, or perhaps they hadn't slept either. I let it ring while I showered. I let it ring while I made fresh coffee. I let it ring while I dressed in my sharpest suit, a charcoal gray blazer and tailored trousers that made me feel like armor. Finally, at 8:15 a.m., just before I left for the office, I answered. Hello. You selfish, ungrateful little bitch. It was Christopher. He wasn't using his disappointed patriarch voice. He was screaming, his voice ragged, likely from a hangover. Good morning to you too, Christopher, I said, putting the phone on speaker and setting it on the counter while I poured creamer. I assume the dinner was to your liking. The dinner, he sputtered. The dinner? Do you know what you did? Do you have any idea how humiliated I was? The bill came. $540, Evelyn, $540. The Barolo was expensive, I said calmly. And the seafood tower, you have expensive taste. I didn't have the money, he roared. I had to call Mike from the club to Venmo me. I had to beg a friend for cash in the middle of a restaurant. The waiter looked at me like I was a criminal. That sounds uncomfortable, I said, taking a sip of coffee. But I'm confused. You said last night that you were a man of vision, that you were building a legacy. Surely a man of your stature can afford a birthday dinner for his family. There was a silence on the other end, a stunned, heavy silence. He wasn't used to me fighting back. He was used to me crying, apologizing, fixing it. What is getting into you? He asked, his voice dropping to a menacing hiss. Is this about what I said? My God, Evelyn, you're so sensitive. I was joking. I was trying to motivate you. By calling me a failure. It was a joke, he screamed again. And for a joke, you humiliate your father, you abandon your family. I didn't abandon you, Dad. I just stopped paying for you to abuse me. Stop paying? He laughed, a nervous, barking sound. Don't be ridiculous, you're upset. We'll talk about this later. Look, I'm at the gas station. The card was declined. The black card. It's not working. You must have missed a payment. Fix it. I have a meeting in an hour and I need to fill the tank. I didn't miss a payment, I said. I canceled the card. You, what? I canceled the card, and Linda's card, and the auto pay on the electric bill, and the transfer for next month's rent. You can't do that, he whispered. You can't do that, that's my money, that's our agreement. We don't have an agreement, Christopher. I have a charity case, and the charity is closed. I will sue you, he shouted. I will sue you for financial abuse. I relied on that money, you can't just cut me off. Actually, I can. There is no contract. There is no court order. There is just a 38-year-old woman who decided she'd rather be a failure with a full bank account than a success who pays for her own abuse. You ungrateful. He trailed off, searching for a word hurtful enough to wound me. You are going to regret this. You think you're tough. You're nothing without me. You're a lonely, sad spinster. When you come crawling back, begging for forgiveness, I'm going to make you pay. I'm going to make you pay double. Goodbye, Dad, I said. Don't you hang up on me. Evelyn, I command you to. I tapped the red button. The silence that filled my kitchen was sweeter than any music. I stood there for a moment, my hand shaking slightly. Not from fear, from adrenaline. I had done it. I had said the words. But I knew this wasn't over. Christopher was a narcissist. When a narcissist loses control, they don't retreat. They attack. He wouldn't believe it was real until the consequences started to hit him physically. And they were about to hit him harder than he could imagine. By noon, the flying monkeys had arrived. Linda sent me a barrage of text messages, alternating between guilt-tripping, "How can you do this to your father? His blood pressure?" and vicious insults, "You've always been jealous of me. You've always been a bitter little girl." Timothy sent a message via social media since I had blocked his number. "Dude, the internet is down. I'm in the middle of a raid. Turn it back on now." I deleted them all without replying. I sat in my office, the glass walls overlooking the city. My colleagues were bustling around, stressing about spreadsheets and quarterly targets. For the first time in my life, the stress of my job felt like a vacation compared to my personal life. At 2:00 p.m., Sarah called. "Evelyn," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "I have the draft ready, but we have a situation." "What is it?" I asked, gripping the phone. I pulled the property records and did a quick background check on the address, just to be thorough before serving the notice. "Did you know there's a lien on the furniture?" "What?" I frowned. "I didn't buy the furniture. Christopher said he brought the antiques from the old house." "He didn't," Sarah said. "He rented a full suite of luxury furniture from a high-end staging company. In your name, he must have used your social security number and the lease agreement to open the account." My blood ran cold. Identity theft. It wasn't just borrowing. He had committed a felony. "There's more," Sarah continued. "I checked the car lease. The mileage, it's double what the allowance is. He's been using it for Uber Black." Uber Black. He's registered as a driver, but the income isn't going into any account I can see linked to him. He's likely cashing out daily to a prepaid card to hide the money from the IRS. And from you. I closed my eyes. It wasn't just that he was lazy. He was working. He was earning money. He was driving the car I paid for, burning gas I paid for, earning money he hid from me, all while crying poverty and begging me to pay his rent. He wasn't helpless. He was a con artist, and I was his mark. "Serve the notice," I said, my voice turning to steel. "And Sarah, Add a clause about the unauthorized credit accounts. Tell them if they don't vacate in 72 hours, I'm filing a police report for identity theft and fraud regarding the furniture rental. 72 hours is aggressive, Evelyn. The law usually requires 30 days. They are not tenants, Sarah. They are guests who have overstayed their welcome. And if they want to argue tenancy, I will argue fraud. I will put my own father in handcuffs if I have to. Use the furniture fraud as leverage. Tell him I'll trade his freedom for the keys. Understood, Sarah said. I could hear the smile in her voice. I'll have a courier there within the hour. I hung up and turned back to my computer. I needed to see it. I logged into the credit monitoring service I hadn't checked in years because I was too afraid of what I'd find. There it was, Rente Center Luxury Division. Outstanding balance, $12,000. I felt sick, but the sickness was quickly replaced by a profound sense of validation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't ungrateful. I was a victim who had just woken up. At 4:00 p.m., the receptionist at my firm called my line. Ms. Bennett, there are 3 people here to see you. A Mr. and Mrs. Bennett and a younger man. They don't have an appointment, but they're causing quite a disturbance. My heart stopped, then restarted at double speed. They had come to my workplace. This was the nuclear option. They knew I valued my professionalism above all else. They thought they could shame me into submission by making a scene in front of my bosses. Are they in the lobby? I asked. Yes, Mr. Bennett is shouting about. Well, he's shouting that you're stealing his home. I stood up, I smoothed my skirt. I walked over to the mirror in my office and looked at myself. I looked powerful. I looked successful. I looked like a woman who paid her own bills. Send security, I said to the receptionist, and tell them I'm coming down. I grabbed the file folder where I had printed the spreadsheet of 6 years of payments, and the fresh credit report showing the furniture fraud. I walked to the elevator. The doors slid open. It was time for the second confrontation, but this time I wasn't trapped at a dinner table. I was on my turf, and I had the receipts. The elevator ride down to the lobby took 30 seconds. In a skyscraper in the financial district, 30 seconds is usually enough time to check email, adjust a tie, or check the stock futures. For me, it was enough time to bury the daughter who yearned for approval and fully resurrect the woman who managed risk for a living. When the doors pinged open on the ground floor, the noise hit me instantly. It wasn't the usual hushed murmur of high finance dealings. It was the shrill, chaotic sound of a domestic dispute spilling into a corporate cathedral. I don't care who she is to you. She is my daughter and she is stealing my home. Christopher's voice echoed off the Italian marble walls, amplified by the cavernous acoustics of the atrium. I stepped But the scene was grotesque. Christopher was standing near the security desk, his face a mottled purple, pointing a shaking finger at the head of building security, a stoic man named Mr. Henderson, whom I had greeted every morning for 10 years. Linda was weeping, loudly, theatrically, into a handkerchief, seated on one of the plush waiting area sofas. Timothy was pacing, filming the security guards with his phone, muttering about rights and lawsuits. A crowd had gathered. Junior analysts, partners from other firms, clients leaving meetings, they were all watching. Mr. Bennett, Mr. Henderson said, his voice calm but firm, his hand hovering near his belt. You need to lower your voice or I will have to call the police. Call them, Christopher screamed. Call the police, I want to report a theft, my daughter. Is right here, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise like a scalpel. Christopher spun around. Linda looked up, her mascara smeared artfully. Timothy stopped filming and sneered. There she is, Christopher bellowed, marching toward me. The ungrateful wretch, tell them, Evelyn. Tell these people how you're throwing your 65-year-old father onto the street. Tell them how you canceled the cards, how you're starving us. He stopped 3 feet from me. He looked wild. The facade of the wealthy businessman was slipping. His shirt was untucked, his eyes manic. Hello, Dad, I said. I stood perfectly still, clutching the blue file folder against my chest. "I see you got my email." "Email?" he laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "You think you can evict us with an email? We have rights. Squatters' rights, tenants' rights. You can't just toss us out because you're having a tantrum." "You aren't a tenant, Christopher," I said, pitching my voice so the onlookers could hear. "To be a tenant, you have to pay rent. I have paid the rent, every month, for 6 years." "That was a gift," Linda shrieked from the sofa, jumping up. "That was family supporting family. You can't take back a gift." "And the identity theft?" I asked, turning my gaze to her. "Was that a gift too?" The lobby went silent. Even the background hum of the city seemed to fade. Christopher froze. "I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, his eyes darting to the side. "I think you do," I said. I opened the folder. I pulled out the credit report, the highlighted lines stark against the white paper. Rente Center Luxury Division, $12,000 in furniture, leased under the name Evelyn Bennett, Social Security ending in 4589. I took a step forward. Christopher took a step back. "I didn't authorize that account, Dad. That is fraud. That is a felony, punishable by up to 7 years in prison." I was going to tell you," he stammered, the bluster draining out of him. "It was a surprise, for the apartment, to make it nice for when you visited." "I haven't visited in 6 months because you told me I brought negative energy into your space," I countered. "And let's talk about the car. The BMW, the one you claim is a company car." I pulled out the second sheet. The GPS tracking data from the dealership service logs, combined with the Uber driver registration I had dug up. "You've been driving for Uber Black for 2 years, Christopher. You've been earning an average of $4,000 a month. Tax-free, because you're hiding it on a prepaid debit card." Linda gasped. She genuinely didn't know. She stared at Christopher, her mouth hanging open. "Robert, is that true? You told me you were consulting. You told me the market was down." "He's been making $50,000 a year," I told her, not taking my eyes off my father. "While I paid his rent, while I paid for your groceries, while I paid for the gas he used to drive clients around." "I was saving it," Christopher shouted, desperate now, sweat beading on his forehead. "I was saving it for us, for the family. I was going to pay you back." "No," I said softly. "You were never going to pay me back. You were laughing at me. You were calling me a failure at dinner parties while spending my money and hoarding your own." I looked around the lobby. I saw the faces of my colleagues. They weren't looking at me with pity anymore. They were looking at me with respect, and they were looking at Christopher with absolute disgust. "You called me a failure last night, Dad," I said, my voice steady and clear. "You said I had no family. You were right, because a family doesn't steal from you. A family doesn't use you. A family doesn't humiliate you to make themselves feel big." I held out the folder. "This contains a formal notice to quit. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises. It also contains a draft of the police report for identity theft regarding the furniture." I stepped closer, invading his personal space, forcing him to look me in the eye. "If you are not out of that apartment by Friday at noon, complete. Ely out, leaving the keys on the counter. I file the report. I send you to jail, Dad, and I won't lose a wink of sleep over it." Christopher opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Linda, who was backing away from him with a look of horror. He looked at Timothy, who had lowered his phone and was staring at his shoes. "You wouldn't," he whispered. "I'm your father." "I'm a grown woman, remember?" I smiled, a cold, sharp smile. "I don't need a father. I need a return on my investment. And since that's not happening, I'm liquidating the asset." I turned to Mr. Henderson. "Mr. Henderson, these people are trespassing. Please escort them out." "With pleasure, Ms. Bennett," the security chief rumbled. He stepped forward, his hand heavy on Christopher's shoulder. "Let's go, sir. Don't make me drag you." I didn't watch them leave. I turned on my heel and walked back to the elevators. I pressed the button. As the doors closed, cutting off the sight of my father being guided out the revolving doors, I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for my entire life. The next 72 hours were the longest of my life, yet strangely, the most peaceful. I didn't answer my phone. I didn't check my texts. I had Sarah handle all communications. She told me that Linda had moved out the same night of the confrontation, going to stay with her sister in Jersey. Apparently, the revelation about the secret Uber money was the final straw for her loyalty. Timothy had tried to text me a sob story about having nowhere to go, but Sarah informed him that at 24, the local homeless shelters offered job placement programs. On Friday at 12:01 p.m., I met Sarah and a locksmith at the apartment building. I didn't bring a weapon, but I brought a camera. I was expecting destruction. I was expecting holes in the walls, slashed curtains, a final act of spite. When the locksmith clicked the door open and pushed it inward, the apartment was silent. It wasn't destroyed, it was just empty. The luxury furniture I had been paying for, the fraudulent sofa, the high-end dining set, was gone. The rental company had apparently repossessed it quickly once Sarah flagged the fraud, or perhaps Christopher had tried to sell it and failed. The apartment smelled of stale air and the lingering scent of Christopher's expensive cologne. I walked through the rooms. The carpets were stained. There were outline marks on the walls where pictures had hung. In the kitchen, on the granite island I had paid to have installed 3 years ago, sat a single set of keys. Next to the keys was a note. It was written on the back of a cocktail napkin. "You win, hope you're happy alone." I picked up the note. I read it twice. Then, I crumpled it up and dropped it into the trash can. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked from the doorway, watching me closely. I looked around the empty living room. I thought about the dinner parties they held here where I wasn't invited. I thought about the holidays where I sat in the corner while they opened gifts I bought. I thought about the failure speech. "I'm not happy alone," I said, turning to Sarah. "I'm happy I'm free." We did a walkthrough. The damage was cosmetic, paint, cleaning, carpet replacement. It would cost a few $1,000s to fix, but the deposit I had paid 6 years ago was long gone anyway. "What do you want to do with the place?" Sarah asked. "We can break the lease, pay the penalty, and walk away, or you can keep it." I walked to the window. The view was incredible. It looked out over the park, the same park I had driven through in the cab that night. It was a beautiful apartment. It was light, airy, and spacious. Far nicer than the shoebox I was living in. "Why should I break the lease?" I asked, looking out at the skyline. "I've paid for this view for 6 years. I think it's time I finally enjoyed it." "You're going to move in," Sarah smiled. "I'm going to renovate," I said, the plan forming in my mind. "I'm going to rip out these carpets. I'm going to paint the walls a color they would hate. And then, I'm going to adopt a second cat." The fallout for Christopher was swift and brutal. Without my credit to shield him, the car was repossessed within a week. With Linda gone and no free apartment, he ended up in a weekly rate motel on the outskirts of Queens. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he was still driving for Uber, but now he was sleeping in the car half the time because he couldn't afford the motel every night. He tried to reach out once, months later. A letter arrived at my office. It had no return address. I knew his handwriting instantly. I didn't open it. I ran it through the shredder in the copy room, watching the strips of paper fall into the bin like confetti. I sit here now, writing this from the balcony of my apartment. I have a glass of wine in my hand, a bottle I bought for myself, not for show. My cats are asleep in the sun. The migraine is go. Nay. They called me a failure because I had no husband and no children. They thought my life was empty because it didn't look like theirs. But as I look out at the city lights, I realize they were wrong. I didn't fail, I survived. And then, when survival wasn't enough, I thrived. I am Evelyn Bennett. I am 39 years old. I am single. I am childless. And for the first time in my entire life, I am rich, not just in money, but in the only currency that really matters: peace.